I think age is never a barrier. I just think that students really need the educational tools, and again, it should be accessible, it should be free. And it should also be standard. Climate education should definitely be a standard part of our educational curriculum, regardless of where we are in the globe. I do think climate literacy is definitely a human right.
Welcome to Tribe Talk, where we alternate between young changemakers and long-standing leaders to demonstrate that someone's age doesn't impact the quality of their work. I'm your host, Kyle Mathis, CEO of Tribe, here with Maya Gowda, founder and CEO of Seed. Maya, thank you so much for being on the show.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. Maya, I want to start by first just saying an appreciation. Tribe Talk is sponsored by Raise, a mobile-first platform powering individual activism, nonprofit fundraising, and corporate giving. So download Raise on the App Store or on Google Play to give, volunteer, and connect.
Streamer. Tribe Talk is a streamer studio production. Stream your podcast, stream your story, stream yourself. Try it free at streamr.nyc. Make your voice, brand, and message seen and heard on every platform today.
Maya, can you tell us about how you got started in the nonprofit sector?
Yes, so I started Seed about 6 years ago when I was a freshman in high school. I worked with some of my teachers in my high school, primarily my biomedical science teacher, whose name is Mrs. McCarthy, who is still advising me today. And she has a lot of experience in curriculum development. So I worked with her to design our first Seed curriculum, which was about the general impacts of climate change, such as impacts of climate change on biodiversity, our health, injustice, and a lot more topics like that. We wanted to include topics that weren't really covered in our school curriculum and topics that aren't spoken about as much in the news. And once we developed that, I reached out to some of the supervisors of Miami-Dade County Public Schools, specifically the elementary ones. And then after about 4 to 6 months, we were able to implement the general impacts of climate change curriculum into the Miami-Dade County Public School Earth Day curriculum, which was a huge accomplishment for Seed and also for our community, because now we were able to provide climate literacy in an accessible way for students in about 171 elementary schools in Miami-Dade County. And from then on, I started to reach out internationally, and I started working with organizations in Uganda and Togo, and we presented a curriculum that was specifically about the climate change impacts that in Africa. And that was another, important aspect of Seed, which is, making sure that we're teaching students about impacts that are directly affecting them. We want to make sure that students have a localized education so that they have a better understanding of how they can take action in their respective communities. And I think that part of Seed, making sure that we're providing a localized education, helps us with our reach, especially internationally, because depending on the country that we're working with, we'll alter the curriculum, or we will add in some new modules or topics to make sure that students really understand what is happening in their community and how they can help. And another way that we've been able to broaden our reach is by translating all of the modules into 73 different languages. And that is really helpful to ensure that language is never a barrier, but instead, a helping tool so students have a better understanding of climate change.
Wow. So really, shout out to your professor, Mrs. McCarthy, for really supporting you along the start of this journey. I think it's surprising how much a teacher's presence can be helpful, but also doesn't really diminish the fact that you still took action and developed something that reached scale in less than a year. So further, just on the start, and certainly we'll get to your global expansion. It's exciting to know about the way that you affect literacy rates, the way that you address a problem that's different depending on different regions. But at the start, this problem was based out of Florida. So what was it in Florida that made you want to provide this education to people? And when you were trying to provide the education, why your perspective? What was missing in the current curriculum?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. I think the Florida educational curriculum doesn't really have much education about climate change itself. It's very brief. We do have environmental science classes. I definitely took one in high school as part of like the IB program, but there isn't too much like education regarding climate change and how it impacts so many other sectors. Like how is it impacting social inequalities? How is it impacting our health? These are questions that students don't really have the answers to usually, and that's why Seed wanted to take that on and make sure that we are able to provide those answers and encourage students to want to learn more. And I've grown up in Miami, Florida my entire life. I was born and raised there. And over time, I've seen a lot of changes in our weather. Hurricanes are more frequent, floods are more frequent, and our heat is becoming worse each year. And another thing is that when I was growing up, we had some issues with mosquito-borne illnesses. And like I mentioned previously, I used to travel to India a lot, and mosquito-borne illnesses are very prevalent there. And, my parents told me how climate change is exacerbating that issue. And I actually like the way I got into climate activism was by trying to reduce like the prevalence of mosquito-borne illnesses in my local community by planting citronella plants, which naturally repel mosquitoes. And from then on, that's when I started to really dive into how climate change was impacting our health and other issues such as, the weather and things like that. And I would say just those experiences are really what cultivated my passion for wanting to become a climate activist and for wanting to teach students and to make sure that they were, learning about things similar to like the way I was and learning about other impacts that could be affecting them much more.
Awesome. But certainly it's one thing to take action yourself, such as knowing that citronella plants repels mosquitoes and that the presence of mosquitoes is increasing. But it's another altogether to decide to help others with that. Like, what was the first step in your journey that allowed you to be more of an educator or teacher? Or was that something just like innate to your nature?
I would definitely say I started with getting involved with climate action through climate action groups, and one that I was very active in was the Clio Institute in Miami, which is known as the Climate Leadership Engagement Opportunities Institute. Through that program, I was able to learn a lot about climate change. That's how I got educated primarily like in the first place. And I was with a lot of other students who are passionate about this as well, and a lot of adults too. And they also had like educational workshops. And I thought that using like the education that I was getting from there and, a little bit from school, I thought that it would be a great idea to put that all together and make it accessible to students of all ages and also talk about certain impacts that I didn't feel like were brought up as much during some of my, experience with some climate action organizations, like the impacts of climate change on health and, aspects such as those. So that's why I wanted to create a curriculum that would be accessible and free to all students in Miami-Dade, regardless of where they are, because sometimes these organizations are located very far. And that's also why I wanted to include the virtual format so that we can teach students regardless of where they are in the globe.
Right. And you particularly pursue children at a young age. So perhaps certainly at the same time, you're extremely proactive at a young age. So as you assess yourself and recognize that you're not waiting to take action, right, are you using that to recognize that youth of any age should still be able and certainly are capable of learning about what's happening in their environment?
Yes, 100%. I think students are capable of anything at any age. I think age is never a barrier. I just think that students really need the educational tools. And again, it should be accessible, it should be free. So And it should also be standard. Climate education should definitely be a standard part of our educational curriculum, regardless of where we are in the globe. I do think climate literacy is definitely a human right and is just as important as other subjects. And with that being said, I think through climate literacy, students will be able to have all of these resources and also have a proper educational understanding of how these impacts are firstly impacting them or their families, and how they can take action regarding these impacts. And whether it be small or large, I think any effort is, tremendous in itself. And I think students should really understand that and should be encouraged to take action and not feel, pessimistic about the issue. I think that's, one issue that I've seen in a lot of like news sometimes, that, climate action just it can come across, or, climate change in itself, like it is a very devastating issue, but students should be, encouraged to, take on the challenge in whatever way that they can. And I think, teachers are a really great way to support them in this. And I think when we provide teachers also with the proper education about how to teach about climate change, then we can motivate so many hundreds and thousands of students across the world to really take action.
Fantastic. So let's dive in there. I mean, you expanded beyond just Florida, right? What was the first stage in going from your local community and realizing that perhaps you could share these lessons at a broader stage?
Yes, so I think, initially I started, beyond Miami-Dade County Public Schools. I reached out to some organizations in other parts of South Florida. And when I started teaching, that was my first, like pilot program. And from there, with the students in Florida, I was able to learn how I can, change the curriculum, make it, more engaging. And that really helped me when I was creating curriculum for countries in Africa specifically. And, from I guess learning in school and like also through my parents, I learned how climate change was impacting a lot of students in Africa. And then through my research, what I was doing to create the curriculum, I learned about, impacts of climate change in Africa firstly, and I created the curriculum to create that localized education for them. And I was really lucky when I was doing a lot of outreach during high school. I got a lot of like positive feedback from, organizations in Africa, like countries that I mentioned, such as Uganda and Togo, that were very reciprocating of the C curriculum and allowed me to give presentations in a virtual format, which was really helpful. And I also got feedback from the students there and asked them how I can, improve the curriculum to make sure that I'm adhering to, their educational needs and making sure that I'm teaching them about topics that are relevant to them as well.
Right. But that first step, right? When you're looking to expand globally and you're trying to reach those organizations, what was the method that you used? Like, how did you find them in the first place? And secondly, I mean, certainly we're aware that 80% of those under the age of 30 live in the global south. So for your work, especially in educating the next generation and making sure that their curriculum includes other factors that are affecting them, right? How did you reach and put that message outward so that they could actually take action or that they could utilize it?
Well, at first, when I was researching all of these educational organizations, I honestly just looked up so many different, I just looked up, oh, educational organizations in Africa, and then I would just cold email the CEOs or, different supervisors of these respective organizations. And whenever, I would get like a yes, I would, have meetings with these like supervisors, and we would review the curriculum, and then we would come up with dates to present all of the modules. And yeah, I would say like those meetings with the supervisors were really imperative to make sure that we're teaching the proper like curriculum and that we're really providing like a localized education. So,
That's awesome. So it was just like blatant cold outreach. And certainly must be gratifying. What was the first way? Yes, tell me about the first time someone responded to one of those. Was it the first email you sent? Was it just immediate? Or did you have a bunch of like ghostings before someone finally responded and affirmed your desire to spread your lessons?
Yes, I definitely had a lot of ghostings. I definitely reached out to more than like 100 organizations in Africa and some other countries in the world. And Africa specifically, one of the organizations that reached back to me was called a dual called Togo, which was an educational organization in Togo. And I think that was one of my first international presentations, which really stuck with me because the students were really reciprocative of the material. I think it resonated with them very well. And they were very curious about what I was talking about. And it was just such a great experience because I was really seeing, all of my hard work really coming to like fruition, and the students were asking really interesting questions, and it also made me like dive deeper into the material. And yeah, I would say that was my first great like international experience, and from then on that really prompted me to reach out to more educational organizations in Africa and also in other parts, and really make sure that our curriculum is as effective as possible.
Right. You recently gave a talk with Start Out online a few weeks back, and something that stood out on our end is the recognition that you are, as you just said, embracing the fact that you're also young and learning through this curriculum at the same time. Certainly by teaching it, you're learning more about it. That's kind of the norm. But do you feel like you relate better with them, or do they listen better to you or trust you more because you're relatable? You're in the same generation as them. You're facing the same problems as them. You have the same perhaps anxieties as them. Do you leverage that or utilize it to connect with people?
Yes, I definitely mentioned, my age and the fact that, I'm only 20 years old and I am around the same age group as some of these students. And I also, acknowledge that I was definitely in their shoes at once. And I also make sure that students understand that regardless of your age, you can definitely understand climate change and its impacts in, your community. I would say that my age definitely helps when educating students. I do think that a lot of the students that I've worked with have respect for me, which has been very helpful when, providing my presentations. I've never had problems with students like talking when I'm speaking, or, other aspects like that. And I think that being around the same age does help them like resonate with the material in a sense, because we're all going through similar things together, definitely different impacts, and some are more, affected than others. But I think being around the same age kind of like it shows that students are really capable of doing anything that they set their mind to, regardless of their age. They just need the educational tools and motivation in order to do so.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, you're the spitting image of the fact that someone can take action, be encouraged certainly by those of all ages, such as your professor, and help other people. How are you using this education not just to help people be informed, but take action? Have you noticed people taking action from your lessons? And do you have any stories or metrics to share about that?
I don't know, like specifically of students taking action, like post the presentations. I have seen students becoming increasingly more engaged in our material. When we were teaching curriculum to students in Togo, for example, students were really curious about learning more about the science behind certain topics that they weren't really familiar with, such as mosquito-borne illnesses. The students are really asking me some very like complex questions regarding the science, and I've seen that with more presentations that I've given to a group of students, they retain the education a lot better, and they're also a lot more engaged in the material. One of the projects I did do in Zanzibar, Tanzania, was planting lemongrass plants to repel mosquitoes, and I was able to, gather like a group of students in an orphanage that I was doing this with to help me with the project. So I think that is definitely one of the climate actions that like students have taken from my lead.
Right. So there's always this expression that typically goes like crawl, walk, run. Right? You have to do an initial impetus. You have to get started in a small scale before you go global or sprint. Right? Your initial stage was working with a professor, curating a little program, and then realizing actually quite quickly that you could reach the entire county. So my question becomes, when you're encouraging others, do you see that you're getting them on the same board as you, where they're doing their first action of learning about something, taking actions with you? That's incredible to go and help community members actually respond, not just learn, oh, this is a problem and it's increasing in your area, but just do something small to solve it. I'm sure that since you're addressing people at such a young age, this is going to lead to a kind of transformation where they're being more proactive or thinking for themselves at an earlier age. Are you excited for that?
Yes, I'm definitely excited for the future generation to learn more about climate change at a younger age and see how they can take action in any shape or form. I would say that, regarding like your statement, I have gotten a lot of like reciprocation from a lot of educational professors that I've worked with in organizations. Sometimes I would get a little bit of pushback and it was challenging to, you know, get people to be like on the same side as me or to try to push this forward at the same rate that I was trying to do so. But with that, I just needed to be really persistent in my asks and just keep emailing, people to make sure that we were still having this, conversation about the importance of seed and implementing it. So I would say persistence was really important when, trying to implement my curriculum for Miami-Dade County Public Schools, specifically, and with some other organizations in different countries as well. And I'm really glad that, I worked towards that because now, like as you were saying, now, more students will have access to climate change education. And I'm really excited to see how the students in our current generation and also like the younger generations are more prepared to take on jobs regarding sustainability. And I feel like there are a lot more people in the younger generations that are, really passionate about these aspects and climate action. And I'm excited to see how we will be able to all work together, all of the generations will be able to work together to create a more sustainable future and also one where people are a lot more environmentally conscious.
Right. Tell me more about that adversity and the fact you have so much grit. I mean, to send so many emails and persevere, to face pushback and continue forward. Tell me about an example of a significant pushback and whether it was based on your age or your experience or your qualifications and how you've persevered forward to continue doing the work that you do.
Yes, I would say my first big pushback was when I was trying to implement the See General Impacts of Climate Change curriculum into the elementary school Earth Day curriculum for Miami-Dade County Public Schools. It was definitely challenging to make sure that the supervisor I was talking to was, consistently responding, and it was challenging to get a meeting. And I do think that made one of the factors that made me a little bit less credible was my age. I was only 16 when I was reaching out to, these supervisors of Miami-Dade County Public Schools. But with the help of one of the educational board members, her name is Miss Luisa Santos, she really helped me garner the attention of the supervisor that I was trying to contact. And that's what really pushed the meeting forward and the curriculum forward as well. So I think networking through Seed and other educational presentations I was giving really helped me make contact with certain people like the supervisor I was talking about that were really important for me to push this curriculum out to a greater audience.
Awesome. So it's the role of those to champion you because you don't want people just to judge you based on your age, which certainly doesn't impact the quality of your work. At 16, you are certainly old enough to have an idea. And while it's impressive, whether for better or worse, to take action on that idea, that should be what we consider. How are you then looking to champion other people's ideas that are younger than you?
Yes, I hope to, champion like other students' ideas through Seed. I hope that some of the students that I'm teaching are also passionate about climate action strategy and also implementing solutions that, will help students like I'm, similar to what I'm doing to learn about climate change and take action in the future. And through Tribe, I'm really excited to meet the new mentees and really, give them some advice and hopefully provide them with some network to help them with their nonprofit ventures. But I think with just like encouragement, I think that a lot of students can see their nonprofits or their projects really coming to life. And it's also important that we also educate a lot of these students on how to balance everything, such as school and their nonprofit, which can also be challenging. But I think with just support, I think a lot more students will be able to really, create impact in the nonprofit space.
Yeah. I mean, you are such a force. I think one thing I noticed when you came to the summit is that there is one thing to be such a champion of your work and an educator and doing support at a broad scale. And there's another thing to recognize that only a select few are capable of empowering other leaders, right? To stand beside them and encourage them for their work, regardless of whether it relates or supports yours or not. Right? You are very much one of the people that's just appreciative of those taking action around them. And for the work in Seed, you've definitely taken action to ensure that those, even that you have communication barriers with, can still receive access. One of the things that you mentioned when we were first meeting is just how many languages you translate Seed into. So can you talk about, first, how you've translated your work to expand access, why, and the impact that it's made on cultures or communities that you otherwise wouldn't be able to touch?
Yes. So I first translated the curriculum about a few years ago, and I actually used Amazon Web Services translation tool because it really allowed me to download all my very huge files and get them all translated in the same format, which was really important. And it was also a really reliable translation service, which is why I used it. And with a few of the languages that I had, such as Spanish and Chinese, I got some of my friends who were fluent in those languages to review the curriculum. I had my parents review some of the curriculum that was translated in our native language, which is Kannada. And with that confirmation that the curriculum was reliable in the translated version, I just went ahead and continued translating all of the curriculum and the rest of the languages that the service provided me with, and that was 73 languages. And it's been very helpful when we're primarily reaching out to organizations, especially in international countries, because we always include a script that teachers can use to understand the material for themselves and also understand how exactly that they can give the education to or provide the education to their students, the English and their native language version. And I think it also helps these organizations that see it as trying to be culturally understanding as much as we possibly can by, making sure that we translated this, curriculum reliably into their native language for better understanding. And the teachers can then provide the presentation in their native language to their students. And I think that that really helps the students, in different parts of the world really understand the curriculum.
Right. You've not only used technology, but also human and lived experiences to expand your access. And you've made sure, unlike many who want to be the figurehead of their movement, or their works, or their project, or their lives, that you can help educate teachers so that their students actually learn from someone they already trust, instead of having to build trust on yourself or someone new or foreign. In many cases, they can go to someone else. Right? I love that idea. It's definitely more scalable. So something else that I want to ask is on the lens of credibility. Right? You've received tremendous awards and would love to hear about certainly not just the, yes, I've received A, B, and C, but more what happened when you received those awards, how people treated you, respected you, or perhaps did nothing change? Whether for better or worse, that it was just the quality of your work that was creating the relationships and scaling your progress.
I think that my work, regardless of the awards, has been substantial enough to keep reaching out to different countries. And then I think also coming to Cornell and then receiving education from a lot of amazing professors in the global development program has really helped me improve seed and also create collaborations with countries I or certain universities that I wouldn't have been able to in the first place. Some of the awards I've received, such as the Silver Knight Award in Miami or being an honoree for the Gloria Barron Prize Award, I think has definitely improved my credibility because it shows that, my project is making substantial impact in my hometown and also in, national and international ways. And I think that helps some other organizations understand the credibility of my work and that it is reliable and also effective. So I would say these awards have helped me very much. And I think also going to Cornell and going to or being a part of the global development program has really helped me too.
Right, so you've seen certainly that the awards or the community that you become a part of through the awards has helped represent yourself as someone on the top. And certainly you've won many awards, but you've also been nominated for many more, right? When you think about the impact that awards provide and being recognized, is that something that you encourage others to pursue? Or when you're trying to go forward, what is it that your end goal becomes? Is it the recognition? Is it the fame? Or is the final mission for SEED that everybody becomes so understood in this education or career, this curriculum, that they become more proactive and start their own seeds?
Yes, I think with awards, one is to, I think with certain awards and certain names, the organization garners more credibility and, I would garner more credibility from it. And I think that has happened. And, with other students applying to similar awards, I would want them to know, you know, just the same thing that if, they do win these awards or they receive an honorable mention, that is, a very tremendous accomplishment and that it will help them when they're reaching out to other organizations and they're expanding globally or, domestically as well. And I would say that it is important for students to apply. It's definitely not the end all be all, but I would definitely encourage them to, try to receive recognition because it's so important for students to be motivated to continue their work. And although they may not always get the recognition, it's going to come at some point in their lives in, it can come in also different forms, maybe not just in, in the form of awards. It can come through, press and news articles, things like that. And I think all of those aspects are really important to motivate an individual, especially at a young age, to, keep going, especially in the nonprofit space, which can be a little bit, challenging, I think. And I would say for those reasons, I would definitely promote like students to apply to these awards. I think they have helped seed.
Right. But certainly at the start, the award of your work was not the target, right? When you were very, very much at the beginning, it seems like the only goal you had was to take a solution that you recognized and share that solution with others. Was your goal at the start to even get to the Earth Day curriculum and get it spread? Or at the very beginning, what was the first goal that you had?
I would say the first goal that I had was primarily for me to also understand climate change and all of its effects and just make sure that the people in my community, specifically in Miami, also understood these impacts and how they could take action. I really saw a lack of action when I was younger, and I think that's because we had a lack of education on the topic. And I would say, yes, my primary goal was just making sure that students really had the materials that they could take action in whatever way possible. I did not really know that the Earth Day curriculum existed until I, came into contact with the elementary supervisor. And I had not thought about international expansion at first, or how am I going to expand with collaborating with certain universities. Definitely those were thoughts that came later in when I was more familiar with seed and was doing a lot more work with it. And I would say primarily the goal was just to help my community and also gain a better understanding of climate change myself.
Maya, to wrap up, I think you've definitely demonstrated that small actions can grow and snowball into something larger. And perhaps snowball isn't the best reference for someone who grew up in Florida, but particularly in your growing up in Florida, how did your family react to the work that you were doing? And especially now that you've continued to a larger scale, was there caution or concern at the start? Or perhaps larger when it realized that this might actually become like something that defined you?
Yes, my family was very supportive of the work that I was doing. I would say through my parents, that's when I first really started learning about climate change and how it was impacting Miami and also our hometown in South India. And they really helped me, come up with certain topics that I wasn't familiar with that I could educate students on, such as, air pollution and extreme heat. I would say that their advice and their support has been very helpful with seed and how seed is growing, and they continue to help me by finding organizations that I could potentially reach out to, and possibly using some of their network to reach out to more organizations in Miami and also in other organizations, particularly in India. So overall, I would say that their reaction was very positive and very encouraging.
That's fantastic. Well, Maya, from a family to a county to the globe, thank you so much for providing education and encouraging people to not only understand the impacts affecting them, but also find ways to take action, really be proactive from someone such as yourself. That is a tremendous lesson. So thank you so much for coming on to the show. Thank you so much for sharing your encouragement, and I can't wait to see you again for the next Tribe Summit.
Yes, I'm excited as well. Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely to speak with you and talk more about seed.
Tribe Talk is a Streamer Studio production. You can view more at www.tribe.us. That's tribe with 2 I's. Try Streamer today at www.streamr.nyc. We're very grateful to the team that made this happen. Executive producer David Walters, videography and editing by David Walters, graphic design by Tristan Bresnan, and hosted by me, Kyle Mathis. Thank you so much for watching.